This is an opinion piece I wrote at the end of 2021. And now that we're officially in an election year in Australia and climate change looks to be the biggest issue of this election, I figured it was worth going over this piece again. The link to the article, if you'd prefer to read, is in the description, and I'm going to publish more opinion pieces on Zee Feed this year, not just from myself, but from all different kinds of people. So if there's something you'd like to hear about or something you'd like to pitch, please reach out and let me know. In November 2021, Shell bought a small carbon neutral electricity retailer called Powershop. Customers of Powershop, understandably, were pretty mad about this. After all, the whole reason that they had signed up was because they didn't want to give their money to a fossil fuel company. But even people who weren't Powershop customers were also pissed about it. And I think the reason is in part because this story reveals a very uncomfortable truth. Our effort to be conscious consumers will not solve the climate crisis. As the planet heads towards a catastrophic and irreversible 2 degrees of heating, we need to push responsibility back to where it belongs. And we need to start applying pressure to where it actually makes a difference. So first, before I get into all of that, let's do a quick recap of this takeover deal. So in late November, Shell announced it had bought the Australian electricity retailer Powershop for $729 million. Powershop had more than 185,000 customers in Australia, and these households had signed up because of Powershop's guarantee that it would provide carbon neutral electricity. So it makes sense that these customers were really annoyed that their money was now going to be going to one of the biggest fossil fuel giants. As so often happens now, angry customers took to Twitter and posted about closing their accounts. And a competitor of Powershop's, Amber Electric, they said that they had a 580% increase in signups in just 3 days. And they claimed that 80% of those new customers were former Powershop customers. From Shell's side of things, the decision to buy Powershop basically boils down to 2 points. One, it's a way to expand into the electricity retail market in Australia. This will be the first time that Shell will actually be selling electricity in Australia. So it's a new business and a new source of revenue for them. And two, it helps to provide some backing to their renewable credentials. Shell says their aim is to provide renewable energy as a service, whatever that means, and buying Powershop is part of that renewable transition strategy. And as for Powershop, a spokesperson for the company told The Guardian that they consider this sale a positive for both consumers and the company. Shell Energy's vision is to significantly invest in a transition to a cleaner future. So now we've got the facts of this deal ironed out, I want to really tackle the bigger message that sits within this story. Here we had a large group of consumers who had already made a choice. They had already chosen a specific energy retailer. As the saying goes, they had already voted with their wallets and said that they wanted renewable energy. But their intention was completely neutralized by a single business deal. Even though these people had tried to divert their money away from fossil fuels, it ended up flowing right back to a fossil fuels giant in the end. This idea that you can solve the climate crisis in part by making the right purchases or product choices doesn't account for the huge imbalances that exist within the system. The kinds of businesses and the size of the businesses that you're usually trying to avoid, they have so much money and so much power that they can outvote, outweigh, outlobby you at every single step of the way. To bring that idea back to the Shell and the Powershop deal, if a big corporate giant notices that they're starting to lose some consumers to a more ethical competitor, they simply can just buy all those customers back. They don't actually have to change anything about their processes. So former Powershop customers, they could jump from one carbon neutral retailer to the next, and Shell could just keep buying those retailers one by one until there was only one option left, and it was owned by a fossil fuels company. Despite all of the best intentions by all of those customers, they would just end up back at square one, and that is the flaw in using capitalism as a tool of climate action. In this system, money and power beats out what is safest and most ethical every single time. The thing is, we should know all this already because we've been through it before. The idea of a personal carbon footprint was created for a BP advertising campaign in 2004 or thereabouts. The goal of this campaign was to convince everyday people that we were responsible for climate change, not BP, and therefore, using that logic, only our actions, not BP's actions, could actually make any real change. That is really the crux of the issue and the heart of this whole story that I really want to get across in this piece. When consumers accept the blame, it lets these giant corporations totally off the hook for fixing the problems that they create and perpetuate. So once a giant like Shell has bought Powershop, it can do one of three things. Option one, maybe it does seriously invest in carbon neutral energy and use this as the launching point to transform its whole business into renewables. In the process, that would help Powershop and grow it and make it even bigger too. Option two, maybe it just continues to run Powershop, but not like invest too much into growing it or expanding the clean energy sector. In this scenario, it could also use Powershop to greenwash the brand and our idea of Shell and kind of use it as a defense mechanism. And lastly, option three, maybe it decides to quietly shut Powershop down or remove the carbon neutral guarantee. This would basically eliminate one of Shell's competitors and reduce the size of the clean energy market. Now, obviously, option one, that sounds great. And this is what Powershop says it believes will happen. Shell has recently bought a number of renewable energy companies under a plan that it calls Powering Progress. But the thing is that the emissions reductions targets set under the Powering Progress plan they're too small to really do anything. They are also only measuring the reductions against 2016 levels. The Paris Climate Agreement and basically any talk of emissions reductions that you hear on the news is typically measured against 2003 levels. So by using the 2016 numbers, Shell's kind of giving their numbers a little bit of a boost. And on top of all of that, Shell only set these emissions reductions targets in October 2021, literally last year. All this evidence does kind of suggest it's unlikely that Shell is genuinely pursuing a total renewable transformation. Now, on the other hand, options 2 and 3 are the types of strategies that big businesses use all the time. For example, Facebook bought WhatsApp to kill off competition for Messenger, and it also bought Instagram to buy young users. Or in another example, Amazon, which bought and then shut down a site called diapers.com. And actually, this is a really common strategy that Amazon uses to kill its competitors all the time. When it comes to Shell, these strategies feel a little bit more consistent with some of the actions that they've taken lately, including the decision to fight against a recent court ruling that would force it to reduce its emissions. Then in the meantime, all while these strategies are going on, businesses tell us that we can wield the great power of our consumer choice until there is only one option left to choose, and it's them. Very quick disclaimer, I don't know what Shell intends to do with its newly acquired asset. These are just ideas of things that could happen, and the only official statement is the one that Shell has already made. So ultimately, in this story, the mantra that there is no ethical consumption under capitalism holds true. Although it feels comforting to think that we can help save the planet if we just make the right purchases, in reality, the power imbalance is too big, and big business can just buy us if they want to. Because of this, it should not be up to consumers to police business practices, and this is where it's time to start thinking about the real solutions. We need adequate regulation to ensure that any business is operating in a fair, safe, and ethical way. It applies as much to electricity generation as literally anything else. Now, if you think that's really unrealistic or too ambitious, let me give you an example that is real and already exists. Food safety standards in Australia are set, monitored and enforced by government and industry regulation. Food and beverage companies are not allowed to sell you products that they know will cause harm as dictated by those regulations. Now, that is a very oversimplified concept of what's happening, but I know you understand what I mean. So just as it's not your responsibility to vote with your dollar for a brand of chips that won't give you food poisoning, the same should really apply to all industries, and it could apply to all industries. It could protect the safety of workers and consumers alike, because if you don't have to worry about food poisoning when you buy snacks, then equally you shouldn't have to worry about killing the planet when you pay your electricity bill, or have slave labor on your conscience if you just want to buy a cute outfit or a new phone. At the end of the day, you can't actually fix those problems for big business. They have to take the actions and they have to make the decisions themselves. As individuals, we don't have as much power as them, but we're not completely powerless. Our vote is our power. So pressuring the politicians who represent us to take meaningful action on climate change is the number one best, most productive thing that we can do. Big business and politicians, they're on a much more even playing field, and they could implement the radical changes to fix these things by working together if they really wanted to. So beyond that, beyond exercising your power and your vote, it's okay to just make purchasing decisions that you are comfortable with, whatever they may be. I was a Powershop customer, so if you're wondering whether I moved my account, yes, I did. Well, my partner did, but our household's account with Powershop was closed and we moved to another clean energy retailer. I'm comfortable with that choice, but I know and I'm fully aware that my choice alone is not enough to radically change the world. We've got lots more articles about politics and power and the climate crisis on the website. So if you want more, please head to zeefeed.com.au. The link is in the description. And if you'd like to support us and the work that we do, please subscribe, follow us on all of the socials, and share this with a friend, because by doing so, you will be helping grow the reach of independent media in Australia.